I've looked at the evolution of the CGIAR and other gene banks, going right back to the early 70s when I was involved in some of the early collections and field collections that led to some of the collections at ICADA, right through to today. And the role of the gene banks over that period of time has evolved massively. Originally, we went out and we collected material because we didn't have anything to work with. We were starting up new breeding programs and we needed genetic variability with which to breed. Then having done the collection, well, maybe we should be conserving this material. And gradually over time, what became very much internal gene banks for the CG, particularly after the discussions and negotiations with FAO and the signing of the agreements, recognizing that we were actually trustees of these collections rather than owners of the collections, was a major step forward in the way that the CG saw gene banks. That this is now a service not just to the breeders of the centers, this is a service to the world.
We just have to go beyond the CGIAR. The breeding programs are very important, but there's a world of funding out there that's funding advanced research institutions in Europe, China, North America, wherever, where researchers are chomping at the bit to understand the deep genetics and diversity that lies in our crop gene pools.
The multilateral system does really promote the idea that this is a federation of gene banks that includes international and national gene banks, and the conversation among them, there's a lot of scope still in many ways. It could be in the forms of programs, in the form of new policies at the international level. So I think there's a lot of flexibility that we have at hand to structure those in a better way.
There are some of those things like conservation which are critical. There's no one else who's doing that work, but there are others who are doing the distribution and the promotion. And so it could be that these are sort of cascading out. You've got the core, which is the legal obligation, long-term conservation for future generations. And then as we go out, these things are really critical and we're bringing in different partners, but the structure and the funding and the physical location, the distribution hubs may be greater and in more places than the conservation.
I also wonder if this opens up new avenues towards wild species, by virtue of the fact that we can be thinking about genes as much as genotypes and alleles as much as genotypes. Not to take away from the importance of functional genomics, that remains, and that's again where the CG's access to wide environments is a real asset that we ought to be using, again, in many cases through partnerships with local or global researchers.
And emphasis on clonal crops, because there's a special opportunity for the CG to stay attentive to clonal crops because of the lack of large public and private sector research in that area.
It struck me that we're talking about two rather different functions of the gene banks. One is as a source of material for breeding programs over the next, and it's a question of timescales as well, over the next, I think that's largely talking about the next 15, 20, 25 years. And the function that the gene banks play there is making available in useful form for breeding programs a set of material that can feed in productively to research, to genomics, to a set of immediate uses. That's a different function from the long-term conservation of stuff that might be useful, that we don't really understand necessarily what will be useful in the future, but making sure that we don't lose important stuff. And I think both of those are, as I understand it, part of the mandate and mission of the CG gene banks. And I think they're both important. We don't want to focus on either one at the exclusion of the other.
Look at the locust problem. You know, we had decades of locust awareness, locust monitoring, multiplying the green mussel fungus to kill locusts. And we kind of took our eye off it because it wasn't a problem, and then suddenly it came back as an avalanche. And, you know, those genetic resources are the treasure trove, are the incredible, tools that we have to help feed humanity and protect our farming systems and diversify them. And that message, we've not been very good at getting out, and we've got to increase that. And just to correct some of the figures, there was an estimation in our group that 50 years ago, 20% of the budget was genetic resources. 25 years ago, it was 10%. Today, it's probably 2%. What do we see it in another 25 years? Will it bounce back to being more connected, or at least more integrated, less isolated, and part of wider budgets? Or is it going to continue to shrink?
The main opportunity we have under one CG is to look much more broadly at where our impact will be. And if we could get the entire group of people who eat food every day to appreciate the value of PGR, we would be farther down the road than if we just focus on farmers, which, by the way, are an increasingly small proportion of population in many countries which have urbanized. And I think that's a trend. So I want to be careful about who we define as the main beneficiaries.
Selecting systems for resilience so that under a credible range of potential future climate scenarios in any particular location, you would have a residual reserve of food there. Because if societal breakdown continues the way it's going now and the international trade system breaks down, and you do have this nightmare scenario of 2 or 3 of the breadbasket regions having 2 or 3 crop failures in a row, then the communities that are growing 100 hectares of a sete and have got that staple food there to survive shocks like that will be a lot better off, right? And so, if you start thinking of that from a biodiversity, eco-agricultural, ecosystem functionality point of view, rather than just food production, I think there's huge opportunities there. It might not be a 300% increase, but it's certainly going to be a lot more than 5.
There's obviously a very careful reminder here also that the CG can't do everything. It doesn't have the capacity, and it shouldn't necessarily build it. Partnership has come up very, very strongly. So that's something that we'll have to think about very carefully, because it's very well saying you need better partnership, you need more collaboration. How you do that is obviously something we've got to wrestle with.
But we've got to look after it, we've got to move forward. The opportunities are enormous. The challenges are enormous, and I think that we do need now to take a very hard look and see how can we make sure that the gene banks continue to underpin so much of agricultural development on into the future. And I think the discussions here have really helped us think through a lot of the aspects of that we'll continue wrestling with as a panel over the next few days, as the CGIAR over the coming decades.
I'll just finish with a group hug. Love you all, and that's the end of this session. Finishing exactly on time, which I feel rather smug about.
Thanks, bye.
Ciao.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.